the things we're told by society or by our family or by teachers, as I was, that you can't do that. That's inappropriate. You can't behave that way. You can't love that person. You can't wear those clothes. And so we push it all down, and we're afraid of that, basically. So for me, I talk about how I was told quite early on that I couldn't write that kind of thing in terms of writing my nightmares. And so for decades, I didn't write dark things. But over the years, I've learned from people like yourself and others to bring these things and to be, I guess, more able to write the things that fascinate me and also you. And once we bring them out of the shadow, we can incorporate them into our lives and into our creativity and write more deeply, write more authentically, write the things that we've been pushing down. And, you know, there's also the idea of the balloons. You know, if you try and push a balloon underwater, you can hold it down for so long, and then at some point it comes roaring out again.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 327 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have a fantastic conversation with Joanna Penn about writing the shadow, about her new Kickstarter, and about the concept of writing the shadow. Now, Joanna has been sharing her writing and publishing experience since 2008 and launched the Creative Penn podcast in 2009 so that writers could learn from her mistakes and be more successful in their creative life. She has consistently provided countless bits of information and inspiration on writing, self-publishing, book marketing, and how to make a living with your writing through various articles, podcast episodes, guest appearances on other podcasts like this one, and in person on stages around the world, and tools and courses, and so much more. Now, I am one of Joanna's biggest fans, and I am honored to call her a friend. I so look forward to every single time I get the chance to chat with her, either in person, via Zoom, as we recently did, and I am so thrilled that a conversation that I had with her just yesterday, Monday, October 29th, is coming to you now in a special bonus episode of the podcast. Now, I'm going to forego any personal updates or comments from recent episodes in the interest of getting this conversation to you as quickly as possible. But I do want to thank the patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Your support means so much to me. And so it's thanks to all of you awesome patrons that this additional episode is going out to benefit all listeners of the podcast. In the spirit of Joanna Penn, thank you for paying it forward and providing value for the entire author community. And speaking of value for the writing community, let's get into this fantastic conversation with Joanna, shall we? Jo, welcome back to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mark. It's been a while.
It has been, and I'm so looking forward to getting to see you in a month's time. I guess I'm going to see you in Vegas at 20 Books.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. And we have been meeting at conferences for a very long time, since you had hair, actually.
Yeah, that was way back when I had some
Frankfurt, when you had some hair. But no, it's been a long time, and we're still trucking. I always think this. I mean, it's so good. And I remember, again, when we met, we used to look at the people who'd been around publishing a long time, and you've definitely been around a really long time, and now I have too. So, and we're still writing, still publishing, still podcasting.
Yeah, and so let's. I want to get into the shadows here in a second, but your podcast, how long is it now? How long has your
14 years.
14 years and what, 700 episodes? Where are
Like
you?
720 or something like that. But yes, it was March 2009. I did the first episode, and this is, I guess, another encouragement for people. I did that first episode. I phoned someone up on an actual phone and put it on speakerphone and recorded it with a little recorder. And that was before Skype, before Zoom, before so many things. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. That episode's still available on my website. But I think
we'll have to play a clip from that sometime.
No, please don't. But the funny thing is, I've really grown into into podcasting, into writing, and you know this, and for listeners who are just starting out in whatever, it takes time. We didn't have the confidence to talk this way. We haven't prepped things. We can talk to each other, and we can talk about writing and marketing and all that, but we have learnt this stuff over the years, so hopefully that's an encouragement to people. Just get started, however rough and ready it is, and then over the years you can improve.
Yeah, and I think there's something about the first book you wrote. How long did it take? Was that one of the ones that kind of like when you finally got it done and you finally launched it?
I think it's funny. No, that first my first book was Career Change, what is now Career Change. It's quite short, and it's very old corporate me,
right.
Sort of trying to break out of things. I did rewrite it later, but it was I think if you go into things wanting to write something massive and also fiction, I feel like non-fiction is quite different to fiction. You and I have obviously done some non-fiction together, The Relaxed Author, and it is a different way of writing. So I didn't really find that first book didn't take too long, but this book, Writing the Shadow, which since we're on a video, I'm gonna show it. Well, what's interesting, the gold foil for people on the audio. But for this book, it's interesting because I first learned about the shadow when I was 18, back when I did what we call A-levels here in the UK. And then I went on to do psychology of religion at university. I later did another degree in psychology. And so I feel like I've been writing this book for almost 30 years, which is kind of crazy in that I've been thinking about how to tap into that darker side of ourselves for decades. And yet I haven't been a good enough writer. I haven't been sure of how to put it into a book for this long. So that hopefully that's another tip for people. Sometimes there's a book you really want to write, but you might not be ready to write it yet. And that's okay. As much as we encourage writing fast and publishing fast, it's also good to sometimes the books of your heart, the books that you think about all the time, can take a lot of time, and also more confidence in both your craft and I guess confidence in yourself, because you've started reading the book. There's a lot of personal stuff in the book, and that takes courage. And I'm still afraid of putting it out there, but I think we get used to that. You still put stuff out there that it's pretty dark in your Mark Leslie persona. So do you ever get scared still?
Yeah, all the time. The fears are what inspire me to write. I'm working on a short story right now for a specific traditional publishing market, and it's a horror anthology. So I'm basically looking at some of the things that scare me, and looking into the darkness, which I think I have to finish reading Writing the Shadow in order to help me with that. So let's get back into that, because you have this amazing persona in the book industry, is upbeat, positive, supportive, helping authors, doing all these things. And yet, I'm lucky enough to have read several of your novels, and Joe, you got some really amazing darkness there. so
do you, Mark.
But it feels like it is the right time, because I think this is the perfect book for you, because it has those two beautiful elements of you that, hey, I'm going to help other writers, and B, I'm going to just expose the darkness here. And I love that you're showing how you've embraced the darkness as a writer. Like you even talk about, I think you said it was Desecration was the book that you actually started to feel that you embraced that darkness.
Yeah, I think, and obviously, the word shadow is difficult because you and I, there is that darker side in our fiction, but the shadow as a personality thing is not necessarily the darkness, is not necessarily writing horror or writing sex or any of that kind of thing. The darkness for each individual, the shadow side, are those things we repress, the things we're told by society or by our family or by teachers, as I was, that you can't do that. That's inappropriate. You can't behave that way. You can't love that person. You can't wear those clothes. And so we push it all down, and we're afraid of that, basically. So for me, I talk about how I was told quite early on that I couldn't write that kind of thing in terms of writing my nightmares. And so for decades, I didn't write dark things. But over the years, I've learned from people like yourself and others to bring these things and to be, I guess, more able to write the things that fascinate me, and also you. And once we bring them out of the shadow, we can incorporate them into our lives and into our creativity and write more deeply and write more authentically, write the things that we've been pushing down. And there's also the idea of the balloons. If you try and push a balloon underwater, you can hold it down for so long, and then at some point it comes roaring out again. And that's kind of what happens with the shadow. And I love this metaphor of Plato's chariot, which is in the beginning of the book. So for people who don't know, so Plato's chariot, ancient Greek philosopher, so the charioteer, the ancient chariot, and there's two horses, a white horse and a dark horse. And the white horse, to me, and I think to you, like Mark Leslie Lefebvre, like Joanna Penn, is that we stay within the lines, we're very helpful, we're very polite, you're very Canadian, I'm very British. People think of us in a certain way, and yet both of us, you have Mark Leslie and I have JF Penn, we write a darker side that is perhaps our dark horse. And I tried to repress my dark horse for a long time doing my corporate job. I didn't believe I was creative. I didn't believe I could write. And my white horse kind of took control, kept me within the lines, kept me very good girl. And then, but the dark horse would rear up, and for me, it was a lot of alcohol involved often and bad behavior. But by addressing what we're repressing and bringing it into the light. So for me, it was eventually changing my job, becoming an author. And then, like you mentioned, Desecration, that is the book where I was like, why don't I write this stuff I'm fascinated in? And over time, it's essentially about driving these horses together. So you're not trying to kill off the white horse or kill off the dark horse. You're trying to get them to run together in harmony, in balance, so that you can bring both halves of your world into one and just accelerate creatively and in life, I guess. So you like that metaphor?
No, I love that. Actually, I had a note to ask you about the dark horse, the white horse, and Plato, because I'd never heard that one before. The other thing that you drive home early in the book is when we read stories, when we read fiction, we need conflict. We don't want just a happy, everything's perfect and people do everything right, right? We need to have the shadow show itself in conflict in some of the things that maybe the characters have to overcome or go through or experience. And you talk about how that shadow helps enhance the writer's craft or the quality of the writing too.
Yeah, well, I think, again, you're right. And I use Colleen Hoover actually later on in the book as an example, because everyone's like, oh, Colleen's amazing. And you read her books and you're like, goodness me, she brings up some dark things about life. And as you say, people don't want happy people in happy land. And in fact, if you start watching a film and there's two people and they're super happy and everything's amazing, you know it's going to go horribly wrong, because that is story, right? That is life. And what I think we're very lucky as writers is we can put ourselves into our art and it will almost dissolve on the page. That's kind of how I felt almost with this book, actually. Things I've been thinking about for a long time, I've put out there now on paper, and they've dissolved in my mind. So my nightmares kind of dissolve on the page. And I think that's why a lot of us write horror. It kind of does get it out there. But the kind of the point of exploring the shadow is that we can both, I guess, heal ourselves, but also help other people. And, many people who suffer, and we all suffer in different ways. If you read a story where someone is having trouble in that way or in a different way and they win. So my books often are about defending family, doing anything to save family and save the world. And a lot of that comes down to I'm so helpless to help my family and the world. I mean,
Right.
we all are. So the things we fear, we can put into our writing. But in terms of writing more authentically as well, we're both, well, I'm very pro AI. You're, kind of pro AI as well. But I think you can be pro AI and also recognize that AI will be writing a lot of books, will be writing a lot of content. And for me, I will use AI tools to help me with my creative projects. But the only way we are going to be able to stand out in a market full of generated content is by being even more human. So the things that really make us, the challenges we face, the individual mesh of what makes us. So the things I'm fascinated with overlap with some of the things you are. Like, we both like bones, right? You have bones there. I was at the Paris Catacomb on Saturday. We love a lot of skeletons, but you're a Canadian man, I'm a British woman. We have very different backgrounds, so we are also interested in quite different things. So I think that what makes us is such an important thing to put in our writing, in order to connect with others and also to liberate ourselves. And so you will grow creatively. You may even grow financially if you take these ideas and kind of put them in your writing. But it certainly takes some courage, because you do have to push your boundaries of what you're ready to be judged about. Actually, I was going to ask you this because, again, you're the same. You have the white horse, Mark Lefebvre, and the dark horse, Mark Leslie. Do you sometimes feel that people judge you with your horror self, or do people get surprised about? I remember being surprised when I read one of your stories early when I met you. I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't recognize that in this Canadian.
I think people are surprised if they discover the other persona and they go, whoa, you really go into some dark places. I've never seen you do that. Well, no, I put on my Stark shirt and I put on my sports coat. And that becomes part of that realm. But it's also part of giving the audience what they're looking for, and understanding that. But also on both sides, and you do such an eloquent job of describing that, is you are true to yourself with the white horse and you are true to yourself with the dark horse. They're both reality. But I want to spin that back to you, because you talked a little bit about especially with your corporate life and having to party hard and work hard, and you talked about that even when you moved to New Zealand, that struggle with too much alcohol was a real thing. And so I noticed this really interesting pattern in this book, as well as in Pilgrimage. And you talk about your journaling in both, but you share some really deeply personal shadows from that. I mean, in Pilgrimage, you reveal, like, when you're thinking, I can't go on, my feet are bleeding, I just want to collapse, call Jonathan, I want to come home, like all of those moments that obviously you turned it around, but those darkest moments that we normally never share with anyone, you just went, hey, I'm going to open the kimono here, everyone have a look. That's got to be terrifying, right?
Yeah, I think fear of judgment has always been big for me and still is big for me, but I think a few things happened. As you say, Pilgrimage and this book, Writing the Shadow, I feel like they are sort of midlife books. And I feel at midlife, so I hit 48 this year, and at midlife, you do question things. You start going, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I pretty much am very likely now to be over that halfway mark. So what are also, I had COVID very badly a few years ago, and when I had COVID and really thought, goodness me, people are actually dying, and I was very sick, and I was like, what do I want to do before I die? And, you and I have always talked about memento mori, remember you will die. And part of the reason that's my sugar skull behind me on that, and you've got your skulls behind you. I mean, we think about this, but yet it really became very clear to me. And as you say, in Pilgrimage, I talk about my sort of mental health, some sort of thoughts of ending things. And when we talk about these things and we bring them out of the shadow, I think the problem with those kind of thoughts is they are in the shadow. We're ashamed of them. We're embarrassed of them. We're afraid of what people will say. And yet, when we talk about them, when we write these things, people say, you helped me. you changed my life. And I feel like both of us have a lot of books that are less emotional and more practical. And this book, Writing the Shadow, is still practical. There's lots of questions, but it is mainly emotional and psychological. And I know you do this more in your fiction, and I do too, which is we're not telling people how to do things. But with the non-fiction, I feel like this is kind of the memoir aspect is quite new for me, or is new for me. And yet what I have felt is that Pilgrimage certainly helped so many people that it almost released within me the need to share the other things. Now, I'm not going to be doing 2 memoir books a year for the rest of my life, because I feel like I've actually shared a lot. But yet I feel like it's important to share these things. But yeah, I'm afraid of judgment, and still am, but I think it's worthwhile for our own development, and also to help others to get this stuff out there. And if there's anything holding people back, so if you're listening, and if there is anything holding you back in your creative life, and if there isn't anything holding you back, you're the only person around here. If you're not held back by something, that may be something to kind of examine. And I don't know, do you, because you've been writing for longer than me, several decades now, do you still feel you're holding back? I mean, it's difficult to admit to, but are there things, I know your mum died, didn't she? And I mean, that's a big thing in people's lives, but these things happen over time. Obviously I've been divorced, you've been divorced, and these are hurtful things that happen in our lives. So are there things you haven't written about yet that you might do?
Tons. I mean, I do hold myself back a lot. I mean, I've explored a lot of fears. I mean, the first book I ever wrote was my fear of my dad dying, and he died 20 years ago, and that's still an unpublished book, and I wrote it while he was alive, and it was kind of funny as I got to the point where my mom died, and I realized in the fictional world the mother had died earlier and the father had died, so this was the son at the point where he had to give up the childhood home, and I just had to experience that myself, and so I realized that very first adult book, I mean, I wrote a lot of books when I was a kid that were crap. They just, 17-year-old sex fantasies and stuff like that, right? Conan the Barbarian Adventures that shall never see the light of day. But this was the first attempt at an actual novel that I wrote a long, long time ago. My dad was still alive and healthy. And now I'm coming back to it and realizing all of those dark elements in that book that I'm looking at and thinking, oh, I'd love to have a rewrite and see if I could actually now, 25 years later, can I make it better? Can I make it that much better? But there's still so many things when I'm writing. A good friend of mine, Sean Costello, is getting older and has some health issues, and he's writing a memoir for his son, and I'm publishing a single hardcover copy of it for him when he passes, just to give to his only son. And it is, and I'm his only reader and editor of this, because it's the only, he doesn't want anyone else to see it, because it's got very deeply personal things that he wants to share with his son that he's never talked about with anyone before. And having gone through this process with Sean, and Sean's still with us, fortunately, just emailing with him last night, but I was inspired to start doing the same thing, and I started working on a memoir for my 19-year-old son.
Because you have one son as well, right?
One that I know of, no, I'm just kidding, but it's an old Robin Williams joke. But I do, there's stories, and they're not all dark stories, but there are things that I've never talked to anyone about, that I've never shared about some of the darkness that I still haven't even put out in fiction, that I just want him to have the full picture, warts and all, sunshine and rainbows, all the things, just so he can have that honest view that probably would be even a lot, maybe even uncomfortable to talk about to this day. And that's been so wonderful, because with that, knowing that no one is going to see it, I'm just, and it's even like, it's very much like journaling. I'm just writing completely from the gut, completely from the heart, just letting it all out. Which again, I hold back with my fiction, I think, in some ways. You can't help it, right?
No, and absolutely. And memoir is a very different thing, as I've discovered this year, and a very hard thing. But I mean, it's interesting going back to that unpublished book about your dad and then the family home, which I saw on Facebook, you mentioning that, and this is a big deal. Maybe revisiting that book would be a really interesting thing, but also the stuff you're writing for, it's Alexander, your son, is it? Yeah. Maybe as you're writing that, some things will come up where you feel like, do you know what? I could share that in some way, because the fact, I mean, you may hopefully live a really long time. And some of these things, I feel like if we can write them and we can publish them, like I say, they dissolve somehow onto the page, and we can somehow exorcise them in some way. So it may be, and there are some tips in the book for how you can access the shadow, because of course mostly it is hidden. But it's interesting because one of them is reread some of your older work or some of your journals, because often some of the first things we write are the things where we're not polished, we haven't learned all the craft, and all these things that are coming up in us appear. So even like my first novel, what became Stone of Fire, has got things like elements of second chance romance, which is crazy. I didn't even see it before, where Morgan's first husband is killed, and she is afraid to love again, and then she meet her partner in the arcane secret agency, Jake. There's something there for the future. And it's interesting because that was Jonathan and I got married around that similar time that I was writing that. And so there's a lot in the book, and because my divorce, like yours, I believe, was difficult, like everyone's divorces, these things are difficult, and so I think there are things that we put in our fiction that you can see within. Obviously, you and I, we're not serial killers. We don't blow up the world. We're not a lot of that dark stuff, but there are elements. So if people want to find glimpses of the shadow, look at what your characters are afraid of, the character flaws, the wounds that might be in your character. The other things that I kind of I give, there's lots of tips, but things like what are you triggered by?
The triggers.
it's a tough word because it's so political, but are there things that you react to that other people don't think are that big a deal? And sometimes you think, why am I so angry about that, or why am I so frustrated? And my partner or my friend is like not bothered at all, didn't even notice that happened. So that's quite interesting. Also, what do you judge, what do you criticize in other people? And I do have quite, I guess, a what could be a difficult chapter around self-publishing, the shadow in self-publishing, the shadow in traditional publishing. And a lot of that has to do with what do we judge and criticize, because you've seen it, haven't you? I mean, in with indie authors, there's and we could talk about ego, we could talk about jealousy, people making loads of money, greed. There are whole things within us that rise up, and then you'll hear people knocking down other authors because of this, that, or the other. They are this, or they're only successful because they pay for ads and all this kind of thing. So it's really interesting when you start trying to examine elements of what you react to. I have a whole chapter on money, because money is a huge trigger for a lot of people. But I mean, it's super interesting, and I think that's what I want to encourage people to think. You don't need to be scared of what might happen if you start looking into these shadows. Be curious, be interested in what that might bring, and find that gold in the shadow.
Oh, I love that. And I can't wait to get to those parts of the book. But speaking about the book, so right now, when we were recording this on October 9th, sorry, I've got my month and date mixed up. But October 9th, we're recording this, and you just yesterday, as of the 8th, I believe, of October, you launched a Kickstarter for this. And this is the second one. Yeah, this gorgeous, beautiful gold
foil book with a ribbon,
with a shadowy ribbon too, a nice dark ribbon. So I mean, in less than 24 hours, you doubled what you were looking for. Can you talk a little bit about the Kickstarter, the process, and even how I think things have evolved for you in terms of being reliant upon retailers and then actually being able to sell direct?
Yeah, so doing the pilgrimage Kickstarter in February was kind of a test run for this one. And this is a tip for Kickstarters. Like we know, it's another ecosystem, and it's full of people who fund random things. Oftentimes I find myself buying things I never even would have found on another platform, right? I know you do too. And so I think my shift, so I'm coming up to 15 years, as I mentioned, of self-publishing. I started 2008, and for the last 15 years, it very much has been, there's been a focus on the very biggest retailer, which we don't need to mention. And then, of course, Draft to Digital, Kobo, as you were involved in, it sort of rose up. So there is we've all focused on the ecosystem of retailers who are companies, big companies. They really like traditional publishers. They don't necessarily care about an individual author's career. They make their money when we make money, and that's brilliant. And we love those retailers, and we love Draft to Digital, we love Kobo, we love Amazon, we love them all, and all the rest. But the point is that I feel like we're moving into this new phase of the author community and the indie author business model, where it's more like the windowing strategy that they used to use in cinema.
Yeah.
So the
They're
idea
still using traditional publishing.
Yes, they still do in many ways in traditional publishing. So what we're looking for is focusing on the fans, the people who know us, love us, trust us, want to buy our stuff, are on our email lists, are at conferences, all of that. Okay, so we can do crowdfunding, Kickstarters, and we can do these sort of short-term projects where we can offer really cool stuff. So, being a publisher background, gold foil is not a print-on-demand option. you really and doing a ribbon is not a print-on-demand option. You have to do custom printing to do stuff, and it's almost like we have been able to do this, but it's been really hard. So we're moving into an era where using printers who are author-friendly and make it easy, like bookvault.app in the UK and other places, we can do these special projects. We can also do really good quality merchandise much more easily than we used to. So we don't need to run a publishing house with a load of employees to do special projects like a Kickstarter. So the goal with the first Writing the Shadow will be to do the special hardback books, but also all the other formats, the ebook, the audiobook narrated by me, the paperback, the large print, and then courses, consulting as part of that package. And then after that's finished, I'll fulfill them. Then I will sell it direct on my store, creativepenbooks.com. And that will be like the second element. So the pre-orders will go up on that. And again, I make around 90% on that. So again, that's much better than any other retailer. And then it will be available everywhere else from January 2024. All the other stores, Draft to Digital, obviously, every other retailer,
libraries,
libraries, all of that, people, all the usual things. So to me, we're moving into an era where digital it's becoming harder and harder for authors to make a good living with digital, because there's so many books, and there's only going to be more in an AI world with generated content. So what we have to do is start to stand out. And this is another reason the Shadow is so important, because we want to, meet people who are interested in what we are. But back to Kevin Kelly's idea of 1,000 true fans, we're almost there, and we're in the long tail that we talked about 15 years ago, where you're looking at a smaller audience, Patreon as well. You have a Patreon, so do I. And we're looking at a smaller audience where we can make more money per reader doing these special high value, high touch, personal projects, signed books and all of this. And then we can still do mass market, but we do it later on. And to me, this has made a huge difference in the way I can market. I feel much happier marketing on this limited period, and then sort of pushing it out everywhere else. So I don't know, I mean, this is actually very traditional publishing. Like you said, this is kind of what they do and did and still do. What do you think?
Yeah, it is in terms of the windowing, but you're doing it a lot more rapidly. Not a year, right? Because they would window hardcover and then a year later trade paperback, because we want it to go through Christmas, because we need to ship it to stores. We need to sit down with people in New York in May to sell into the bookstores for September. And we so But what you're doing is you're allowing fans the opportunity to connect directly with you and to support you directly.
Yes.
And I've even noticed, and I haven't done much pushing to sell my stuff directly, but my books for writers,
Yeah.
I'm just selling a handful a week of people who are finding and buying them. And I think the only place I really have, I think sort of I have a link on my website, but I also include it in books to read, like with the pay hip or whatever. And it's not my fiction so much that's selling that way, but my books for writers, because other writers understand, more margin go. And they must be doing that because they know
Yes.
I get more margin when they buy it from me rather than from a retailer. So there's this movement within the author sphere to not, again, it's about publishing truly wider
Truly
than
wide.
just retail. And I've always said, wide with a capital letters, not just Amazon versus 4 other retailers, but being exclusive in any platform. But you're taking advantage of the benefit of saying, hey, if you're a real fan, a big fan, here's an opportunity for you and I. And then after that, there's going to be another opportunity for a larger audience to buy this stuff from my website. And then after that, the whole world has access to it in whatever way they want to consume it.
Yes.
Right. And you've always been about multiple formats. You got the gorgeous limited edition hardcover, the regular hardcover, the large print, the trade paperback, the audiobook, the ebook. So however you want to consume my books, go for it. And I love that model. I guess I'm curious, because lots of people, I always say that the creative pen's like the CBC of indie author pop podcasts. Now that would be BBC in the UK.
I was going to say,
NPR,
don't know what that is.
NPR for Americans, but very similar, that high quality show that stands above the other ones. CBC is like Canadian Broadcasting radio. CBC radio is like BBC radio, like NPR. I'm sorry for folks in Australia, New Zealand. I'm not familiar with those similar programs.
ABC.
Oh, ABC. Okay, there you go. Australian Broadcasting Corporation. But that sort of high quality. And I think a lot of writers, even though we're talking about the shadow and we're talking about embracing that for making your nonfiction and fiction better, right, by bringing that extra element of humanity out, people do see you as an optimist. And a lot of things you were talking about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, are the things that are coming true today. And so I think authors seeing you do a Kickstarter or selling direct or any of those things, I think brings more hope that there are more possibilities out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, I am an optimist, and I think that The Shadow, I feel, is an optimistic book, despite it being a difficult process to identify some of these things. But you're right. And even like this week, as we record this, or last week, Shopify and Spotify, I wish they'd sorted that out.
I know.
Spotify, the audio company, has now introduced audiobooks. And I've seen loads of authors going, oh no, this is the end of royalties. And I'm like, we've had this so many times. And my attitude was, oh, this is brilliant. I love the Spotify algorithm. The discoverability will be amazing. And the point is that if someone listens to my voice on an audiobook on Spotify, then maybe they go on to listen to a podcast episode, or maybe they go and buy a book, or maybe they visit my website. Maybe then they discover a novel. Maybe later on down the road, they end up being a patron or whatever. And this is how we have to think about things. And again, I think you and I get this because we've been doing this for so long, but it's hard to remember what we're building is an ecosystem. And so that's why I'm saying I feel this is like day one or year one of my next 15 years, which is I'm building a new ecosystem, and we're training our readers. Like you said, you're starting to get direct sales. Every time I look at my phone now, there's like another sale from my Shopify. I've got 2 stores now, creativepenbooks.com, jfpenbooks.com. And though every single person who buys from an author direct, that's a new way of buying. Or if someone just said today, this is my first Kickstarter I've ever supported, and there are new people coming in every day learning to buy in a different way, and that's what we've got to think about in terms of the positive aspect of creatives making a living. What we also know is that you cannot stay stagnant. You cannot do things the same way now as you did 15 years ago. And what's so funny is when we did a talk at Frankfurt Book Fair, whatever year that was, 2010 or 2012 or something like that, we said it's a time to do things differently.
Yeah.
Things are changing. And that was when ebooks were like, oh no, we don't need to do ebooks, or it was all a kind of crazy thing. So that's another thing for people to remember is the business model will keep changing, the websites will keep changing, the opportunities will keep changing. But what doesn't change is writing the books of your heart, writing the books that will help you and will help others. And if you're in control of your intellectual property assets, you can take advantage of whatever comes along. And if you don't control it, you won't be able to. But if you do, I mean, you can choose how to license things, but it is wonderful if you can see an opportunity and then jump on it. But also know this is definitely a long-term game, but with AI powered marketing and what may change in generative search, and I'm researching this at the moment, but how generative search is going to change things, I see as like super hopeful. Again, I'm more excited about the future now than I have been for years. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I think there's going to be more opportunity, and again, I've been quoting you about doubling down on your humanity is a very important aspect. But then the other thing is, I like to say I love to use AI as a tool. I don't want AI to make me a tool, right? So that's but when you talked about leveraging your IP, like leaning into the IP and stuff like that, it also seems like there's a parallel between reaching in and understanding that at a much more deeper level than, oh, it's just a book. But then you also talk about you use the term the gifts of the shadow, and I'd love if you could explain a little bit more about the gifts of the shadow and how what those gifts mean to you as a creator of fiction, nonfiction, and even the overall Creative Penn brand.
Yeah, so I think again, it is about finding the gold, essentially finding that gold within it. Creatively, I think for me, by being much more personal through Pilgrimage and through this book, Writing the Shadow, I have learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about others. So those are gifts. I mean, the gift of, and I don't even know where this quote is from, but it's like, after the curse comes the gift. And this has been a sort of quote about menopause as a woman. After the curse comes the gift, and it's something that you don't, when you're in a curse situation, you don't understand, but when you come the other side, you kind of realize it. And some of the things that we all went through as well in the pandemic, even though most of us blocked it out of our mind at this point. I mean, I guess the importance of getting on with these major projects, I think, is important, and for people to really look at what they want to achieve with their body of work in this very short life, right? Because it is so short. And I think one of the gifts of the shadow is figuring out the things that are stopping you and dealing with those things. And often those things are not small things, or they're figuring out what they are. So for me, again, I talk about this teacher who said to me, you can't write that kind of thing. And I spent like 20 years thinking I wasn't creative because I was told that. And I want people to think about that little child, the creative child that has been hurt by words or by society. And yes, there may be trauma for some people, but for others, it's not what other people would consider trauma. I mean, so a teacher telling me that what I wrote was not appropriate is hardly trauma, and yet it crippled my creativity for decades. And that's what I want you to think about, is value the things that are holding you back, figure them out through all the questions in the book or other methods, and then turn that into other things. And therefore you're kind of accepting who you are, you're being a more empathetic person, a more accepting person, because if you can recognize the difficulties in yourself, you can recognize it in other people. So it can make you kind of less judgmental. And it's not about blaming others, it's about making things better for you in your life. But also, I guess, removing that creatively, removing a level of self-censorship, of feeling like, yes, I can put that out there. Like, I would love to read your whatever it is, essay or book or whatever it is about losing your childhood home. That fascinates me because I've led one of those lives where I've never had a childhood home.
Yeah.
I'm a what they call like a third culture kid who just moved around countries and places, and home is a really difficult thing. That's a whole nother podcast, but home is a thing I don't really get necessarily. So I want to read that from you, and you haven't put that out there, so I can't read it. But a lot of people listening, I bet they're like, oh, I want to read Mark's grief story.
Grief story, yeah.
Grief story. And let's face it, grief is a human emotion that
Universal.
everyone's everywhere. Everyone's going to go through. And in fact, yeah, you're right there. The universal emotions, these are the hardest things to write about, and yet they are the things that touch people the most. So I guess all of those things are gold. You have to decide what gold is for you in terms of what you want to achieve with your creativity, with your author life. But I also think it can turn into money. I mentioned Colleen Hoover, who is earning an absolute ton of money by writing books that touch all of these areas. And in fact, one of her best-selling books, It Ends With Us, it is about her parents' abusive relationship. I mean, super dark, and readers just can't get enough of her work because it touches them. And that's what I want us to do, is we have to touch people with our writing. In no other way.
Not in an inappropriate way.
Not in an inappropriate way. But I mean, even that, I mean, that's like a topic that, you know, is like a trigger for some people. So there's something that's interesting in itself. But yeah, I also feel like it can help you navigate the way ahead. So I'm really thinking now, as I said, about what other projects I'm going to do that matter to me. For example, I really want to do a Gothic cathedral photo book, which is like totally exactly like, either you like Gothic cathedrals.
They take my money, I want to buy it.
Exactly, like either you like Gothic cathedrals or you don't.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty obsessed with them, and I've got pictures from all of
cemetery book.
Yes, a cemetery book, a death culture book, a memento mori book. I have lots of ideas for non-fiction under JF Penn that I have kind of kept down because it's been inappropriate as Joanna Penn, but I'm ready to step into that. And the Creative Penn podcast will continue. I'm still going to be doing, you know, stuff for writers, but I think I will be more able to create the projects I want because of writing this book. And I hope it helps other people too.
Oh man, speaking of helping other people, I just want to, and again, we could talk for hours, but I know we both have deadlines we have to get to. You have questions at the end of every chapter, like in many, I think all of your books.
Yeah, all of my nonfiction,
which is fantastic. But then you also have, and this is available through the Kickstarter, which will still be running because this episode's going live ASAP. You have a workbook that has the questions, and so you can just kind of like not worry about writing in the book, but have your own workbook for that. And that's available obviously through the Kickstarter, and then you'll have it available
so that will also be on that will be on creativepenbooks.com as well. But yes, the creativepenn.com/shadow book will redirect to wherever the books are. So if you're listening in the future, if you're listening in the future, you can always find it at that link. But yes, spiral bound lie flat workbooks are now available. I do them through bookvault.app, but also as print on demand. And that's something we haven't been able to do with the other print on demand services. I don't know why. I don't know why it's so hard, because it seems like something everybody wants.
Format.
Yeah, everybody wants it. So yes, I mean, I haven't looked into everyone, but yes, so the spiral bound workbook is available too. Lots of things. I guess the other thing we wanted to tell people was they can read about the darker side of our fiction. We're both in a bundle, aren't we? A Halloween bundle.
Right. Yeah, for just for October of 2023, the Halloween, the horror bundle curated by Christine Catherine Rush.
Yes, indeed. And my book Catacomb is in it, which came out earlier this year. It's a monster horror, father-daughter horror. Again, I think I put some shadow in there for sure. I've always wanted to write a father-daughter book, a bit like Taken. I say it's Taken meets Beowulf in the Catacombs under Edinburgh.
And I haven't read that yet, so sold.
There you go. It's in the bundle, which you're also in. So
Yeah.
tell people what of yours is in the bundle.
I've got a exclusive short story collection called From Out of the Night, From Out of the Night and 13 other tales of horror or chilling tales. So again, exploring that fearfulness that we have of what might be coming out of those shadows as well. And that's available for a limited time, right? And you can get, I don't even know how many books are in it. 16.
There are tons of books and stories,
Yeah.
and it is at storybundle.com/horror.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so we're both in that. But yes, if you're interested in everything else I do, thecreativepenn.com is my main site. The Creative Penn podcast is and you've been on my show many times. No doubt you'll be back as well. And jfpennbooks.com for the rest of my fiction and everywhere books are sold.
Oh my God. Joe, it's always great to talk to you. And it was so much fun getting to walk amongst the shadows with you today.
You too. Thanks, Mark.
I love how in our conversation where I'm supposed to be interviewing Joanna, that she keeps throwing me some brilliantly probing questions. I mean, she's such a phenomenal conversationalist, and I appreciate the way she's always thinking, always asking, always searching, always learning, always looking for more things, and always looking for the bright things. Even when we're talking about the shadows. So, for example, she talks about finding the gold in the shadow. And that is why I'm so excited. I got an early reader's copy of the book in digital format, and I've only read the first part of it, but it is such a fantastic book, and I can't wait to read the rest of it. And the other thing I wanted to reflect on was when Joanna talked about when we write or talk about those moments in our shadow, how it can help others. And I've experienced that several times in this very podcast where I shared, and Joe mentions that I also shared this on social media, Instagram, posted to Facebook, etc. But even a few episodes back, I'm sharing my rambling reflections from the road where I just turn on the mic and I just go. And oftentimes I've shared back in 2021, I shared the darkness. I shared the darkness of when I hit a wall as a writer and where I was in that really dark place. And wow, the comments and the feedback and the direct messages I got from people. When I shared a few episodes back, the rambling reflections from my childhood home, and I just kind of turned on the mic and went, "Blah! Here's my therapy. Here I'm just going to share the darkness that I'm in." The response from listeners who texted me, who messaged me, who emailed me, who commented, and continued to comment about that, sharing their own experiences that were similar or dissimilar, and Joe even talked about that, the definition of home, and several commenters talked about that as well. But I mean, I felt more connected and closer to you guys, and potentially you felt a connection to me because I shared something that was probably pretty universal. And if not the universalness of losing a childhood home, the universalness of being in that dark place and just sharing. And it's just so amazing how beautifully compassionate other humans are. And that's the thing that I return to as we look at the conflict and turmoil and tragedy and the horrible things that people can do to one another. I believe, like Joanna in The Gold, I believe in that compassion that humans have for other humans. And I see evidence of it. And I think to people like Mr. Rogers, who said, look for the helpers. And Joanna's one of those helpers. And it's so great to have a shining voice like hers to help lift us up and remind us of the optimistic things that we can look forward to as writers. So those are the reflections. The other sort of final reflective piece in that is So before talking to Joe, I was curious. I'd been thinking about, ever since losing the child at home, pulling and dusting off that old manuscript of Morning Sun. And it's spelled Morningson. So yes, the title is a play on words on a sun who is in mourning. And also an important moment in the book that's related to the sun rising in the east, the morning sun. So that's where the play on words goes there, because I've always been a fan of play on words, even in this book that I wrote 25 plus years ago. But I'm even more motivated to pull it out and see what I can do with it. And I'm likely going to do that after I finish reading Writing the Shadow, Turn Your Inner Darkness into Words. Now, I want to pause here and read the description of Joanna's book, just so you can truly appreciate it. And I'm sure you did from the conversation. Just that final reminder. We all long to write boldly, without filters or fear. To spin stories that capture the messy beauty of what it means to be human. Tales that lay the bare truth of living, darkness and all. But something holds us back. Whispers of, "Who do you think you are?" And "You don't have permission to write that." Our own self-censorship and the judgment of others keep us from writing freely and sometimes from living fully. But all great art taps into darkness, and your most compelling work emerges when you embrace your full humanity, both light and shadow. So after reading that description of the book, after listening to the conversation, Joanna and I'm curious to hear from you, dear listener, about what's holding you back. Is there something that's holding you back, preventing you from embracing your full humanity, preventing you from writing freely, or even sometimes from living freely and fully? And I'd love to hear your comments. You can @ me at Mark Leslie on social media platforms, at Mark Leslie Lefebvre on some of the other ones, if you dare try to spell that out. You can also, of course, email me, mark@markleslie.ca, or better yet, leave comments over at starkreflections.ca or on YouTube, as a lot more wonderful folks are leaving comments there. So love to hear from you, because it does feel more like we're connected and we're having a great conversation. And I want to remind you that the Kickstarter is still live. So I went and looked at this just before recording this, and as of this morning, October 10th, 2023, Eastern time zone, the Kickstarter is over $19,000 Canadian of a $6,118 Canadian goal. Now that's translated from the £5,000 goal, and that means it's over £15,000. So triple, it's basically triple, and I think there's still a dozen or more days for you getting access to the special content. So, as I said, the Kickstarter is still live for another dozen or so days, where you can get early access to this book before it's available for purchase, even directly from Joanna on her website, and well before it'll be available on all those various retailers. So again, the link for that is you can check it out over at thecreativepenn.com/shadowbook. And the great thing about this URL, thecreativepenn.com/shadowbook, is currently, at the time of this recording, it'll take you over to the Kickstarter. Once it's available for direct purchase from Joanna, it'll take you there. And once it's available on all the major retailers, libraries, etc., it will be available there. So no matter when you're listening to this podcast, if you go to thecreativepenn.com/shadowbook, you'll be able to find it. And speaking of finding cool things, as a special bonus for patrons of the podcast, I've already supported the Kickstarter. And in my support, when I was going through the checkout, there's the add-ons. And I thought I would put in for an add-on for an extra copy of the beautiful gold foiled lettered cover, hardcover of Writing the Shadow. And that second copy I'm getting, is going to be going to a random patron of this podcast. Now, I'm going to be doing that draw very shortly. I'll announce it in the very next episode in just a few days, because I want my patrons to know if they're going to get the book from me or not. And then that way you still have an opportunity to go and check out and support this Kickstarter from Joanna if you're interested in that. And I do that with a huge thank you to all the supporters on Patreon who support this podcast at patreon.com/darkreflection. And then so that copy what I do is I take all the patrons, I put you guys in a spreadsheet. The $1 a month the folks get one entry. The $3 a month folks will get 2 entries, and of course the $5 a month folks will get 3 entries. And I do random.org. I do a draw. I'll let you know. I'll message you directly, and I'll of course announce it in the next episode, so you can go check out thecreativepenn.com/shadowbook. And that's a huge thank you to all of the folks who support this podcast. And this is sort of a paying it forward thing, which is something Joanna does so beautifully, so wonderfully, sharing knowledge and insight and information, and of course sharing that gold within the shadow. So that is it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot that you're listening to the podcast, that you let me, get into your ear, get into your mind, potentially get into those reflections that you're having about your long-term author career. So until next episode, which is just a few days away, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing, good stark reflections, and gold when you are writing the shadow.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.